This quote says, "When in doubt, remember you have the power to say no, the authenticity to be you, the patience to keep learning, the fortitude to continue trying, the courage to embrace change, the fearlessness to give selflessly, the wisdom to cultivate inner peace, the bravery to fulfill your aspirations, the openness that grows friendship, the awareness to follow your intuition, and the intelligence to not repeat the past." Hi, and welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast, episode number 74. Today on the podcast, I want to talk to you about something that I notice that comes up for many of us, women especially, and moms especially, and that is the idea of questioning whether we are good enough. And sometimes it shows up like we don't have clarity of our self-concept and we are seeking for answers outside of ourselves. And the reason I wanted to share this is because sometimes when some topics come up a lot in my coaching, I almost feel like the universe is saying, tell the people all the things about this topic. And I will say that over the last few weeks in my coaching practice, I have had to coach on this often, and I've also had to coach myself on this, okay? When you think about the concept of whether you're good enough, sometimes we assign that responsibility of knowing that to other people. We let other people tell us or inform us whether we're good enough, and we wait for them to give us the answer because, we think that they have the answer and we don't. And the first thing I want to say is we have all the answers. Absolutely, we do. And we get to decide that. Hey, Mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. So I'm going to read you this. It's from my good favorite author, Young Pueblo, and it's in the book Inward. And so I'm going to just read it and just let me know what you think about it, okay? Many of us walk the earth as strangers to ourselves, not knowing what is true, why we feel what we feel, actively working to repress experiences or ideas that are too jarring for us to observe and release. It's a paradox occurring in the human mind. We run away from what we do not want to face, from what brings feelings of pain, and from problems we don't have answers to. But in our running away from ourselves, we are also running away from our own freedom. It is through the observation of all that we are and accepting what we observe with honesty and without judgment that we can release the tension that creates delusions in the mind and walls around the heart. This is why the keys to our freedom lie in our darkness. Because when we observe our darkness by bringing our light of awareness inwards, the ego begins to dissipate into nothingness and the subconscious slowly becomes understood. The mind is full of shadows, but shadows cannot withstand the patience and perseverance of light. Our minds can become like stars, powerful united fields of pure light, but unlike a star, the healed mind will dwell in awareness and wisdom. And that is the end of the quote. The reason I wanted to share this quote is because sometimes we think the answers are out there and other people can give us the answers, but really sometimes we just have to turn inwards and find ourselves, okay? And really find what it is that we want to be and become. So I was recently talking to a client and we were talking about the concept of who is the person you want to become, because as part of self-awareness and part of connecting with your spouse is knowing yourself better. And she offered me the idea that one of the things she wanted to be is competent. And So I asked her, what would you rate your current competence? And she said 6. And that was really puzzling to me because she is a CRNA. She's a highly intelligent woman, amazing working mom. And I'm like, where did you come up with a 6 from, right? Now, the irony of this was that one of the things that I find very fascinating is nurse anesthetists who do OB. So they like do epidurals, they do all of that, because I have not done any of that stuff since I was in training. And I have no desire to do it. But also, that is a skill that is totally lost to me. And I just think it's so complicated. Okay. And I made peace with that. And so the irony of this is like, this is somebody who like does a lot of like call and does OB. And I'm like, like, how did you come up with a 6? And to me, like, that just spoke to the concept of like not thinking you're good enough where you are right now. And so as I was exploring with her, I was like, well, like you do all these amazing things, and are you willing to believe that you actually are a competent level of 10, right? Even though that's a person like your future self you really want to embody, like in the now, you still are that person. And it was like, it was just interesting because it was shining a light on the very thing, right? Another one was I was having a conversation with another client. She had received this feedback from her husband, and she was translating it into like, oh, I'm not a good human being, or I'm not a good wife because of the things that he said. And so when we were exploring this, I was thinking, well, but you're letting this person decide for you whether or not you're good enough, right? And so I just want like to kind of drive this point home. The person who gets to decide if we're good enough is ourselves. Because when we show up in the world believing in our inherent worthiness and goodness, it doesn't matter what other people are thinking of us, right? But when we show up in the world questioning our inherent worthiness and goodness, then it's like we have this like big sign on our forehead, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't think I'm good enough. Don't look over here. We show up in a different energy. And so what I just have been thinking is, for example, when you think you're not good enough, how do you show up in the world, right? How do you show up? Are you showing up as defensive? Are you feeling like you're being criticized and judged? And then what people say about you, you start to let those negative emotions take over. Another way that shows up is, for example, in criticism, if your spouse criticizes you or complains about something, and you make it mean that they think you're not good enough. And so you let the negative emotions drive the bus, and then, you could become defensive. And then you start giving yourself ideas of who you are, right? I had a client once say to me, she's like, well, if my husband has a different money story from me, I make it mean that he thinks that I'm careless and vain and I'm wasteful. And so I was helping her understand, like, okay, but what is the perceived value of the things that you want to have and you're purchasing, right? What might be careless and vain to me is definitely a need for another person, right? And that person gets to decide that for themselves. And so if you find yourself always asking other people to affirm your worthiness for you, I just want to offer you to check in with yourself and ask yourself, what do you really believe about yourself to be true? Because if you can build that evidence for yourself, like you're worthy and you're good enough, then when you show up in the world, it reflects to other people. Another example is when you believe like you're applying for a position or you're trying to get into a new field, and you have an interaction with somebody and you feel dejected or you feel frustrated, and you make it mean that you're not good enough for the thing that you want to do. What happens then when you have that thought is when you think you're not good enough, right? You start to be in self-doubt and you show up discouraged. And the actions that you take when you're discouraged will not move you closer to the goal of what you want to achieve. So it's almost like this self-repeating, like, negative feedback, right? You believe you're not good enough, then you're discouraged. And the actions that you take, you're not really taking actions believing what is possible for you. You're consistently showing up in discouragement, and then you affirm for yourself that the thing that you want is not available to you. Versus just being willing to believe in yourself and being okay with what you're bringing to the table right now. Okay? The other way that sometimes shows up in my clients that I coach on business is when they are trying to connect with their clients, like their business clients, and they have these thoughts that they're not good enough. And what happens is if you have a thought that you're not good enough to connect with your clients, right, you then feel dejected and you throw an adult tantrum basically, and you marinate in that tantrum, and you don't take action to actually build connection with your clients. And so what happens then is that you really are not good enough to yourself, right? And so how can you then show up in the world as being good enough? So the first thing I want to offer all of us is checking in our belief in ourselves. Are you willing to believe in your worthiness? And I don't want you to go from like, I don't think I'm good enough to I'm the best thing out there. I just want you to take a micro step up the ladder with me and practice the thought that I'm willing to believe that I'm worthy. And when you're willing to believe that you're worthy, right, you feel more empowered to then be kind to yourself, to look inwards, to practice self-compassion, to practice self-kindness, and show up as your highest self, okay? When you don't think you're good enough, sometimes you might take action out of fear instead of self-trust. I was giving a client an example of when you do things in convincing energy or rushing energy because you want to prove to people that you're good enough. I gave her the example of, and if you're in anesthesia, this will make sense. Let's say you have to set up for a case and it's like really, really like fast-paced and things are coming up, and you don't check your anesthesia machine. And so you don't check in with yourself, you're rushing. This is dangerous because when you connect the patient to that machine and there's a huge leak in the circuit, you don't even have the capacity to check that leak while the patient is dependent on the machine to provide the anesthesia, right? Versus if you can just slow yourself down and notice before you get into that rushed energy to prove to other people that you belong and you're worthy, you will then check for any internal things that you need to tweak before you launch out into the world. And so sometimes just like being in that awareness, setting a goal, and then being kind to yourself, checking in with yourself like, am I making a decision, a rushed decision? And if I find myself rushed, am I doing it out of fear or am I doing it out of trust, right? Because if we can trust ourselves and we know that we are doing the very things that we need to create what we want in the world, right? We just trust ourselves. We don't need anybody to tell us how we are. Are we good enough? Do we belong? Are we, because then you don't even like validate your own emotions, right? So sometimes also what it looks like is when we go to somebody and they give us a thought that maybe we're overreacting or, they invalidate our experience and we make it mean that, yeah, I'm dramatic or I'm this and that. And we don't check in with ourselves to actually like just be kind to ourselves and be like, well, that's their perception of all of this, but I'm just willing to believe that I'm good. Like I'm showing up in the world the way I need to so that I can just be kind to myself, right? The other thing that I wanted to talk about is sometimes like thinking we're not good enough shows up when we start thinking that people think we're needy. If we ask for help, we're being needy. Or if we, want to connect with our partners and we have the thought that they think we're needy. And, if you think about when somebody says you've been called needy, right? Or if you look at somebody and you find that somebody is needy, like how do you respond to them? The thing is, the world that we live in is very self-sufficient. And so we've learned that neediness is something we should reject. We've also learned that we should shut down our needs, and we don't actually support our fundamental attachment needs, right? What happens then is if we don't get these needs met, which sometimes, and I talked about these in the previous episode, right? We feel shame because we think there's something wrong with us because we didn't get our needs met. And then what happens is that we protest against the vulnerability because we start to worry, like, what if someone knows how much we need them and then they reject us, right? It's like, I'm not good enough for this person to love me and take care of me and be in my life. And if they find out that I need them, I'm going to push them away, right? Sometimes there's also the fear of being humiliated because we need someone or something. I remember, like, I was probably 22 and I had, like, it was like a Match.com date, and I'm a planner, and I remember like trying to like get the details of where we were going with this guy, and he was like, "I'm sorry, I don't want to go on a date with you. You're too type A." And I just like made it mean like there was something really wrong with me for like wanting to have structure in my life. And now that I know what I'm at, I'm like, yeah, of course it felt humiliating for somebody to quote unquote reject me, right? But when we don't get our attachment needs met, right? And we're left with that hole in which shame then just digs deeper and deeper, right? So what we usually do as humans is that we try to counter that vulnerability. And so we create our own defenses and protections. So, and then we basically worry about others who show what we disdainfully say is their neediness. Yet our neediness and their neediness is the most normal function of like normal things in the world, right? We should all have our needs met. Like, imagine if the baby was crying in the crib and we're like, man, this baby is so needy. Like, we would never say that, right? Because they're looking for connection, right? So, and sometimes we didn't get those needs met in our childhood, but now we can. So what I want to offer you is to start to pivot away from the dread of being needy, right? And to realize to be needy is to have needs, and then start awakening your compassionate heart that recognizes everything you need, right? And if we channel that need, it can actually be the thing that takes us where we want to go, right? So Deirdre Faye talked about like this idea of neediness. And in order for us to tolerate the pain that we are in for being needy and to be with open hearts when we feel regret, what we need to do is to start practicing the power of reliance, right? It's to start realizing that we all kind of need other people. You know, in every religion, there's the person who we saw their lives transformed, how they transformed their pain into compassion. So if you think about like in Christianity, the example of Jesus, in Islam, the example of Muhammad, and then in Buddhist teachings, they have the three jewels, which is Buddha, which is the example of what's possible, Dharma, which are the teachings, and the Sangha, which is community. The Buddha is the example of what's possible. So again, when we realize that even in these realms, the idea of needing other people, needing compassion, needing grace is so fundamental for us to be in self-awareness of what we actually show up in the world as, right? And the other thing is that when we recognize what we value, what's important to us, right? We can then use those qualities to build us up. So I just want you to think that if you have a question about are you good enough, and part of it is like you question, oh, I'm so needy, or I don't want people to think I'm needy, or I don't want to be vulnerable. The first thing I want you to know is you don't have to be vulnerable with every single person on the planet. You just pick your vault of people who you can be vulnerable with and you connect with them, right? Because first you have to reconnect with your soul, which is your true nature, right? And then you find that source of meaning. One of the things about shame is that when shame is intense because we're afraid of what people are thinking of us, we don't think we're good enough, that is a sign of protest, right? Because we protest the disconnection from our fundamental needs, which we know should be fulfilled, right? So if we think about the need for connection, interdependence, autonomy, if those needs are not being met because we don't want to be quote unquote needy, our bodies are like, no, this is actually not what we want, right? So whatever like we're struggling with as far as neediness, sometimes it's actually the struggle of just being like, oh, maybe I'm just not in alignment with my fundamental basic needs, right? So I just want you to ask yourself sometimes when you find yourself being needy or question that another person is being needy, whether it's your spouse, like notice the negative connotation you have towards that, and then just check in with what need is the person asking to be met? What are they asking of you? And then connect from there, right? And then ask yourself, like, what are your values? Like, if your values are, for example, family and connection, right? Can you then understand why getting a need met is a part of how we show up in the world? And that is just human nature, right? So if you can drop the context and the judgment around needs and create compassionate space for yourself to have needs and for other people to meet our needs, like how can you show up differently? How can you connect with your innermost self? I hope that like clarifies what I was trying to, say about being needy. Because again, it's not other people's jobs to validate our experience in the world, right? And, as long as you want other people to validate that, you will always remain attached to their reaction to who you are and what you're doing, right? Instead, anchor yourself in believing like, oh, I got me. I have my own back and I'm good enough in the moment, right? So when you can understand like your own needs and you validate your own needs, then you obviously are good enough because you're good enough to yourself. And other people don't have to come into the world and validate that experience for you. It is then your responsibility to validate it for yourself, and you stop abdicating responsibility to other people to help you be who you are, right? And when you do that, you then show up and you also see the inherent goodness and good enoughness, quote unquote, of other people. You start to like notice when you don't check in with yourself. So I'm going to end this episode by telling you another quote by Young Pueblo. And this quote says, "When in doubt, remember you have the power to say no, the authenticity to be you, the patience to keep learning, the fortitude to continue trying, the courage to embrace change, the fearlessness to give selflessly, the wisdom to cultivate inner peace, the bravery to fulfill your aspirations, the openness that grows friendship, the awareness to follow your intuition, and the intelligence to not repeat the past." End quote. So when you think you're not good enough, I want you to remember that you have all these things: power, authenticity, patience, fortitude, courage, fearlessness, wisdom, bravery, openness, awareness, and intelligence. And no matter where you take yourself in the world, you always bring these things with you. You always carry those inherent values inside of you. And the moment you notice yourself reassigning the responsibility of your worthiness and understanding yourself and giving other people permission to decide that you're good enough, check in with yourself. Remind yourself of these values that you have that make you who you are. And then allow yourself to like just be kind to yourself and not let other people decide for you who you need to become. Because you can decide to never reject yourself. And the only person you can reject is you. And the only person who can truly reject you is yourself. So go out into the world, embrace all your flaws, right? You have the opportunity to show up as the best version of yourself every day. and change it every single day. So I want to ask you, do you want to try to be a person who is good enough for people, or do you want to be good enough for yourself? What are you going to do to continue to offer yourself the validation that yes, you are good enough. Yes, you are worthy. You belong. I always share this on many of my episodes, but there is no prerequisite for worthiness. You're worthy right now in this very moment. You don't have to show up any differently than you did 2 minutes ago to be worthy. What if you believed that? And what if you dug deep into who you are and 100% believed in your inherent worthiness? How would you show up differently? How would you take massive responsibility for how you show up in the world without letting other people decide for you whether or not you're good enough? I just want you to check in with yourself every single day when you question, am I good enough? Am I a good enough mother? Am I a good enough wife? Am I a good enough friend? Am I a good enough employee? You get to answer that question every single day because you set the standard, right? You set your internal standard and you get to decide that every single day. And you get to decide to up-level that version of you every single day. And when you show up in that belief of your inherent worthiness, if other people think you're good enough, good for them. Their like is extra, right? But I just want you to anchor yourself in being self-kind and self-compassionate, believing 100% that you are 100% worth it. I know this episode was a short one, but I really wanted to drive that point home. It was actually an unplanned, unoutlined episode. And I just felt like I needed to share this on the podcast and move my schedule around to share this with you. If you're listening to this in time, I am in Kenya visiting my best friend and her family, and I am taking time to rest and recharge. I'm actually recording this the day I leave, and I am so grateful for you and your company and for your listenership. I appreciate all the feedback that y'all sent me. It means the world to me. And I'm just grateful to be in a space in my life where I get to share wisdom and I get to learn and grow with you. Thank you for being here. And please leave us a review if you haven't. It means the world to me. I hope you have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.